Hi, guys. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us for PropTalk, a property management podcast powered by Resman. I'm Elizabeth Francisco, and I am the president here at Resman, and I am your host today. And we are very privileged to have a returning guest who's going to be joining us today to really share her wisdom and thought leadership about, how has the marketing landscape changed post-pandemic. So understanding the marketing landscape post-pandemic is really important, especially given the changing economic and market conditions that we're all facing. So I am really, really, really honored to have you join us here today. This is a great conversation. It couldn't be better timing because we are coming into another changing environment for a leasing cycle. And it could be very different than what people have experienced before outside of the pandemic, just going back to a more competitive market, which we may not have seen in several years. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. You think, should we address the elephant in the room?
Well,
the pink elephant in the room?
We shop at the same place. Imagine that.
This just worked out perfect.
I don't know about you, but I love that jacket.
I really do too.
Well, let's dive right into it because there is a lot to talk about in this episode because I know it's top of mind and anything we can do, one of the goals of our Prop Talk is really to think about how we can be good stewards of the industry. And, it's occurred to me even within the Resman base of products that we have customers that have never been through a real economic downturn. We all had our challenges through the pandemic, and we all had to adjust, but in many ways, we were all adjusting the same way, right? We all had the same issues to solve for. Now, we are in a different situation. We may all face some of the same challenges, but how we address them is not a one-size-fits-all, right? And it's going to be the true test of management is how you manage when things get tough. And I know this is probably really right up your alley as far as understanding how leaders look at their strategic spend and how they can utilize marketing or how they can pull back on marketing, which I'm not a fan of, to try and meet budgetary goals. And I think short-term thinking versus long-term thinking has big consequences. So I'm super excited to have you come and join us talk about this today. That's a lot. Talk about queuing it up. Let's get started really quick. If you will, just tell us a little bit about your company, Sprout Marketing, and if you guys saw episode 1 or part 1 of this, that she's the CEO and co-founder with a great story. So if not, check that out. But if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about what your company does and we'll get started.
Okay, so we are a marketing platform that property managers use to basically execute their marketing, their retention, their resident events, and their social media. And in a lot of ways, we take what is considered grassroots marketing, all those things that managers need to do, but we give them the tools, the resources to bring it to life. So their designs, their what they're actually going to use in the field, that's what we provide for them.
Okay. I love that you included retention because a lot of times when we hear people talk about marketing, you tend to think about the front end of the leasing cycle, right? Net new leases. So will you elaborate a little bit about that? Because it's still to this day, when I'm out in the market, when I hear people thinking about their leasing, and even sometimes in the technology space, we get so focused in on net new. But those of us who've been around a hot minute, we know that truly retention is where it's at. Like that's what will save your budget.
That's what will save your budget. Bingo. So I like full circle marketing. I like marketing that how you got them in the door is how you continue to keep them in the door. So for a lot of times you're out there and you're marketing a certain lifestyle. And I always tell managers rather than taking that hat off and then putting on now your retention hat, let's say that you're doing something for lifestyle marketing in the fitness space and you're talking about how fit friendly your community is. Well, then host events that support that so that not only are people that come in, just seeing that, then they're experiencing it when they live there. And so if you can do that across multiple platforms, you're staying really on brand and consistent. And I liken it to marriage in a way. In the honeymoon phase, we throw everything at the relationship. You pick out what you're going to wear. You're really kind. You're really thoughtful. And years into marriage, if you don't do that, then you're not going to have a good marriage. But a lot of us, it's easy to get kind of sloppy. And I think about that. Say that you were married to someone, I've been married this year 21 years. If you were married to someone that wasn't very nice and you said, hey, I need you to treat me a little better. And they said, well, I gave you a beautiful wedding, didn't I? Well, that doesn't really count anymore. Like, right? It's all the little things in between. That's
Yeah.
what retention is. It's yes, we get them in the door in the honeymoon phase, but
Mhm.
can we keep them? Can we get them committed and saying yes basically over and over? And that is, like you said, it's going to save the budget, but that's really where marketing grows legs and people talk about it, and then you
Mhm.
save even more money that way. So there's just it's a very holistic approach to marketing, and if people started with that in mind, and then, not that you don't want to get new leads in, but it's very much a full circle approach.
Right. But if you're doing retention, well, you don't need as many new leads, right?
Exactly.
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 No, I love that. And I think from what you're saying, it really ties into this concept of grassroots about what you're doing for the current existing residents and
Hmm.
word of mouth, WOM, right?
Right.
Still the best and cheapest form of marketing one can have.
Yeah. And now we're, integrating it with word of mouth that is online, how social
Hmm.
proof is so important. So it's almost like word of mouth on steroids. Whatever the experience is, well, now it gets
Hmm.
magnified 1,000 times over on
Yep.
social media or, on any of these review sites. And so really focusing your efforts there, I mean, it can have reach beyond what you could even imagine for just paid ads.
Oh, wow. Wow. See, this is where I really like to have someone like you come on Prop Talk with us because it just puts me back in the seat. It makes me want to have a
I
property. It's like,
know.
oh, I want to do this. So let's talk about because I don't have assets. We don't have assets under management any longer. But what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that today's marketers are facing?
Well, I mean, the biggest one obviously is going to just be budget cuts because of the way that the economy is going. And basically, ownership is just looking at every dollar that's being spent. So I think
Hmm.
that's just going to be a challenge. What comes with that is just budget cuts that maybe aren't made with the best decisions in mind, maybe not looking at all the data,
Hmm.
maybe not having the right data in place. I see that a lot. When you're in a good market, sometimes it's easy to kind of just get sloppy with even the way you're entering your data. And now all of a sudden it's time to cut things and you're
Oh,
cutting the wrong things, right? So that's to me the biggest. But then there's these two other ones we were talking about post pandemic. Well, one is just straight burnout. Like people
hmm.
have not recovered from what has happened in the last 2 years. I think there's
Mm.
still this like moment of exhale, but we've really not gotten a chance to catch our breath. And leasing
Yeah.
teams are just kind of feeling that, right? So now it's like, man,
Hmm.
we just got out of this, and now we're going to have to go into this other kind of fighting mode of catching every, lead. And then I think the third one is the era that we live in. I would say this is a big threat is just straight up distraction. People having too much input, too many things that are pulling at their time, both the prospect, the residents, and then our team members. Like
Hmm.
how engaged are they really? Mix that with burnout and you've got like this it's going to be tough. Like you mentioned it at the beginning, the leadership is going to really separate right now. It's I always call this like separation season. It's
Mm.
we're separating the ones that can handle this time with the ones that have been kind of coasting.
Yeah. No, I think that's great that you're pointing that out because there's, in another podcast we talked about this. There's a lot of owner operators that have come into the space
Mm.
since the Great Recession and coming in 11, 12, 13, 14 is a very different environment. And so now as they're coming into the headlines, right? We had our challenges with COVID, but we also saw some great net rent
Yep.
gains. Um, historically high occupancy, retention, um, and to the point I would say, like, if you were not leading your market, if you're at the bottom of the market, you really have a lot of
Yeah.
self reflection you should have been doing the last 2 years because those are the people I think will be really the ones that struggle the most going into what we're heading
Oh
into
yeah.
next. Um, and it's interesting because of your tenure in the industry. I think to be mindful of the headlines because they are headlines. Look at the data because there's I just did a great webinar with Jordan from ALN Data, and data is so important because it is different. But for, if you've been around for a hot minute, 3 to 5% rent growth that used to be normal. It was
Hmm.
not the sky is falling, right? We were happy to get those
Right.
numbers at one point in time. So I think it's a matter of, like you said, really being able to utilize data to make good decisions and not do what they call it ditch to ditch
Yes.
decision making.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the headlines during COVID, right? Like there's this like whole media around different things, and you
Hmm.
could really buy into the hype of whatever the media was pushing at the time. But you're exactly right. So just because statistics are happening in one part of the country does not mean it's actually happening at your community. A lot of the
Mm-hmm.
regionals that I'm talking to have not felt any change yet as far as, they're still able to push rents and their occupancy is still high. Now, that can be so different from one market to the other.
Right.
And you might be a regional that's managing a portfolio that has a varied, different things happening at those communities.
Mm-hmm.
I would say exactly what you said. Don't put on the blinders that this is just where we're going. Some might be able to hold steady, and I think many will.
Okay. No, that's a great point. And like I said, as we were mentioning, make sure you know your markets. If
Yeah.
you're going to have those conversations, data is key. So thinking about that and about the landscape and how it can change regionally, right, in different parts of the country. Um, how do you, this might be too broad of a question now because we've already started
Yeah.
talking about it, but when you think about how your leasing and your marketing should be approached right now, and you're meeting with a client, how are you talking about that?
Well, first of all, just asking what are they feeling? What are they seeing in their
Okay.
market? How have traffic patterns changed? How has
Hmm.
the leads changed? How has the, turnaround time changed? How's their retention? I think everyone getting very clear on that. One of the things that actually, Mark Hurley.
Hmm.
Okay, Mark Hurley, one of the things he shared with me, and I thought this was perfect. It's not exactly tied in, but it ties into our overall conversation. He said that there's a wartime leader and a peacetime leader, and he said you lead very differently during those times. And in a sense, we've been in peacetime, like you said.
Hmm.
We've been able to push rents. Things have been very, very good for multifamily for a while
Yeah.
now. And so I think it's going to take a different approach, and also looking at your team members. Do they actually have the skill set required to do the prospecting and do the walking somebody through the lease cycle with the skill that is required? Because there's a lot of people that have done well the last few years, but not because of some skills that they've developed, just simply because there was such a demand. And so I
Right.
think beyond just looking at your traffic, it's like looking at your team. Is this the right team? Can they
Hmm.
handle the pressure? And if not, hey, let's get in there and can we coach these people? Some never went through what we went through in 2009 and really, those years. And even, I mean, we see it historically, but it's like you can train to take every opportunity and just to be ready for it. So I think a lot of it is just as a leader preparing your team for it too. Well, back to what I said about distractions and burnout, it's like this perfect combo. So, first of all, it's like there's a lot of things that get pushed on site teams that they don't actually know how to use or use properly. So, there's
Hmm.
a training component.
Okay.
And I think there was a filling just like seats, So, it's like, are you a
Hmm.
warm body? Can you lease apartments? Okay, you're in. And people a lot of times don't stop and evaluate until their results now are, when you
Hmm.
feel it in the pocketbook, when you're not meeting budget, when your occupancy is dipping. And so, yeah, it's
When the
still crazy
problem
to
becomes
me
a pattern.
when the problem becomes a pattern. I was talking to Lisa Trozine last week, and she was saying how, she couldn't get in like different things. You can't get people to answer the phone. You can't get people to follow up. So I think it's like putting on a different set of lenses and really looking at your community. I mean, you and I know this is old school. It's like looking at your community with fresh eyes, walking through every single process that a prospect would go through and saying, is this easy? Is there a
Hmm.
frustration point? I talk about this a lot. If you ever walk in a room and you stub your toe, it doesn't matter how good of a sleep you were in. All your energy is going to go to that tiny toe that hurt, right? It's
Hmm.
like the stub toe phenomenon. It doesn't matter the bells and whistles that you have at your community if it's hard to find your community, if nobody calls you back, if nobody answers the requests that you have. It doesn't matter how many awesome things you have if it's frustrating to do business with you. So I would say
Hmm.
that's a good starting point, is just walk the path of the prospect and then see. And if you're a regional, check on your teams, coach your teams, but also then go through the process and say, are they
Hmm.
following up? Are they doing those things? Once you set that expectation, are they actually following through?
Yep. Is that another way of saying inspect what you expect?
Yes, it is. I'm thinking of a slide right now that we've all seen on these presentations and like lived by.
Didn't we just say something about, or maybe it was on the other podcast about getting back to basics, or was that lunch? I can't
No,
remember.
it's
But
what's
it's,
old is new, right?
yes.
Like it becomes new again.
And basic fundamentals are still basic
Yeah.
fundamentals about doing the things that matter, right?
Yes, absolutely.
As we're coming up, we're in March already, which is
Yeah.
crazy. We're coming on the end of the first quarter. Historical leasing patterns were starting to come back last year. So if we assume we're going to see the same thing this year, that means we're already off and running. So take the time, go back through those processes and walk the path. I think that's great advice.
Yeah.
And that's a start. Um, but before they can walk the path, they need to understand too, like how are we attracting renters?
Right.
You know, I personally have a theory that there's a lot of people, there's a lot of pent up demand that may or may not be of a financial position to make the move this year, but people have been staying in the same units. A lot of people
Mhm.
stayed put that maybe would have otherwise, maybe even transfer within the community, but or at least shop around. And a lot of from my friend's son group, my son's friend group, they weren't doing that. They were reading the headlines. They realized what rents were, so they just we're going to stay put another year. So if you have this pent up demand, people are going to be out there looking. How do I get my asset out in front of the renters that are going to be looking to move this cycle?
I mean, I think a lot of the marketing is the same. I think, looking at your whether you're spending on an ILS or you're doing your own kind of,
Mhm,
PPC or any kind of spend is like, where is your return right now? Where
mhm.
like seeing what is giving you the best results. I think there's like the basics that you're doing, but when it comes to like really looking at your budget, it's like taking every little piece and saying, which one is giving us the highest yield? Because I do think people are going to cut budgets and I think that they should look at things. I'm not saying that cutting advertising is smart across the board, but I do think what happens in this market is that
Mm,
you almost put on the hat to say, where did we get a little bit frivolous, right? And
mhm.
so I think like that's step one. But as far as attracting the renter, I mean, there's so many things. I'm a fan of old school marketing outreach. I think that's still there's still a place for it. In fact, I was talking to a community yesterday, and they're doing outreach, but not the way that maybe we used to do it. They're now partnering with micro influencers. And this was, to me, this is so
Huh.
brilliant. So what they do is they reach out to people within their like neighborhood, their area that have influence on a social platform and they call them micro influencers. These are not people that have massive. This is not Kim Kardashian, right? This
Mhm.
is somebody that has anywhere from maybe 10 to 50,000 followers but local. They partner with them to come to the community for a day and they do like a day in the life at the community and they post on their social
Cool.
channels. Pretty cool, right?
That is really cool.
So they post on their social channels and, completely tag the community and show all the amenities and they, get as much of their audience to see that. And what I loved about it is because there was always a little bit of a fear with partnering with an influencer that lived at your community if they live there, which there's ways to do that, but
Mhm.
you're a little bit more responsible for like the day to day. What kind of a renter are they really, right? This was a really great way to say, no, it's a partnership and you're paying them, but you get to approve the content that's going out there.
Oh,
And
wow.
so that's a kind of a new age form of outreach marketing. And I think there's still room for old school outreach. I think there's still place for partnering with like, your bigger HR
Mhm.
companies and your bigger, businesses and just going in and introducing yourself back to the what is old is new again. I think that human touch is going to be big in 2023.
I would agree with that. I think we are, and what did we say earlier? We're pack animals by nature,
Yeah.
and humans need humans. And there's nothing more personal than their home. I think we've talked about that.
Yeah. And I think what's so cool is we are in an era where we're going to get to pick the best of technology. So, this
Mhm.
virtual leasing, even like AI, how there's the potential for so much there. But I think that we shouldn't lose the human element. And
Yeah.
I do see that as could that be a danger? I think that's where there's some things that just you cannot replicate and you don't want to, that people
Mhm.
are going to. And I think, especially the more that that becomes rare, those that can deliver on the human experience, I feel like that's going to be just like, this gem in a world that is going so tech heavy. But we're in a cool space where we can marry both so
Mhm.
that for those that want to have this seamless experience and maybe not interact with someone, there is that option. But for those that don't, how do we still meet the demand of just having a personal, like, a person?
Yeah. You're right, because different people have different needs, and
Yeah,
they and meet people where they're at. Right? Isn't that what we
exactly.
say?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm curious about with the influencers. Have you heard any feedback from anyone that's doing that in the market, and how successful has that been?
Yeah. So I actually, it was kind of a random thing. I follow a blogger that also, she is an influencer, but she is she has a cookbook, and so her thing is recipes. And I followed her for a long time. And when she was remodeling her house, she partnered with an apartment community and lived in the apartment for like 6 months with her family. And so she actually shot her cookbook while she was there, and it was a full trade for
Oh,
the
wow.
apartment community And the experience was so positive for both of them that, it's something that worked out. She ended up continuing doing, even after her house was remodeled, she ended up continuing using that space for shooting her promotional videos there because it was such a benefit to the community. They
Oh,
loved
wow.
it. So, I've seen examples of that. Now, the company I was talking to yesterday, they said it has been the best experience with the micro influencers, and the spend hasn't even been so crazy. So,
Hmm.
and they said some have even turned into renters themselves. And so, I think there's just all these different ways that it has been beneficial.
Oh my gosh. See, that's how you know. I'm not saying it's the greatest idea ever, but I'm just going to say it makes me excited. And it's like, oh, if I had property, I would so be doing this.
Well, me too, because I think about that. It's like these guys already, you know, we talk about this a lot. It's like the currency we're going after is attention now. That is
Hmm.
the currency with marketing. It's just people are so strapped that when you can get their attention, partnering with an influencer that already is getting that attention, there's already a trust factor there. So then partnering that with your brand and home representing so much of what they do, to me, it's a natural fit.
Right.
And I like the micro influencer because I feel there's not that attachment that can sometimes get sticky. But I
Hmm.
think, hey, if you can make it work either way.
Yeah. All right. So if we're thinking about, because you brought it up, when we think about the ILSs, this can show how old I am. I remember having the conversations about online advertising and getting an online and for rent. I'm
Yeah.
just gonna call it what it was. I used to be a for rent customer, and dealing with investors who are like, "Oh, great, we get to cut all of our print advertising," and at the time that was not the case. So now I wonder how are people looking at their budgets and how they spend on marketing, not specifics, because it's going to depend on what works for your assets and what type of channel is working best for you. But I just wonder, like, what is it that you feel like that needs to be talked about today that maybe is not getting enough attention, or we're thinking about the wrong way?
Well, one thing I just see is that, the there's being put a little more fire under the feet of the teams to look at the data to say not just leads, but
Mm.
which ones of these leads are actually translating for us. And I know we've been
Mhm.
talking about that for years,
Right.
but for right now, I feel like that's what it is. It's like looking at each different source that you're using and saying, yeah, they might be delivering a ton of leads, but which one is actually
Mhm.
translating to our community? I think that's a big piece of it. That's always been it. So I don't know if I have something new to look at in that regard. I think that goes back to like how do people track? And I feel like it's an old one, but it's the one of the biggest problems that we have with advertising. And I think it's also a manager knowing her team too.
Mhm.
I think at least I did when I was a manager, if we're getting a certain number of leads and we're not able to close the leads, and I've got
Mhm.
one team member that is closing leads and one team member that isn't, that's pretty obvious,
Right.
right? That's your obvious one. I think also listening to your phone calls, listening to your follow through, regularly seeing who is following up with the leads. How are
Mhm.
they handling those leads? I think you can eliminate, is somebody actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, or is this just a quantity thing that we're getting in that isn't, the right kind of
Do
leads?
you think has it changed at all with, at one point during the pandemic, there was a lot of conversation about, everybody was jumping on bandwagons of self-serve everything,
Yeah.
right? And out of necessity. A lot of places you had to. Different states came out and relaxed the restrictions much sooner than others. So totally understand that. Um, but there was so much conversation about, well, what's it going to look like
Yeah.
afterwards? Are we going to be able to, I can tell you, I was in conferences with investors who had this idea that, well, this is great. We're going to be able to cut leasing staff. We're going to go to completely online leasing only. And, we'll be able to take that FTE salary and put it back into the property or into cash flow. So what's the reality of today's leasing environment?
Man, that is so all over the place. Just at a conference that I was at recently, they showed data that said that, 70% of renters or something like that preferred to do the virtual tour. And then they did a poll in the audience and said, how many of you are actually finding that to be true with your sites?
Mm-hmm.
And the numbers just in the room didn't even come close. They were still having so many that were preferring the in-person leasing. And so that kind of sparked this conversation, just
Okay.
kind of like a Q&A, and saying all this data is saying that people are preferring the self-tour, but what we're really seeing in people that I'm talking to, they're
Mm.
still doing the in-person. It's still,
Is it both, maybe?
I think it's both. I think that it's both, but I think that not having the option to have a person tour is probably not a good idea. I've
Okay.
not seen it work maybe it's some high-rise communities where there's, we've seen a few high-rise communities that have done completely virtual, but they also have a concierge that offers some human interaction. So it's not
Mhm.
100% hands-off either.
Okay. Well, that would make sense. That's I was curious because we look at in the and part of Inhabit, the company that is parent company for Resman, and who I work with now is a vacation side of the
Hmm.
business, and they're
Want to be
and
completely turnkey, right? Like
yes, the whole process
nothing.
is in every way. Um,
I'll tell you that if I'm going to rent like an Airbnb, I'll look to see if it says like completely. You want to have the experience where
Mhm.
you're not having to deal with anyone.
This is the point where, to my vacation side of the business, I point out that direct bookings are always best.
This is like an infomercial right here. I love it.
Like she said the Airbnb word. Let me correct you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, I've learned that lesson. It's like, no, direct booking is always better.
Well, whenever I go to direct booking, I
Now,
always look for a key, like a where you don't have to have human contact.
yes.
But that's where we go back to the data. So it's like data versus conversations that I'm having with my teams and with
Mhm.
on-site people. And while the data is saying that people like the hands-off experience, I'm still talking, and the majority of the leasing teams that I'm talking to are saying that the majority of people are not going from sight unseen to touring on their own to leasing, that there is
Hmm.
something in the point where there's a bit of a human interaction.
I don't know why, but you're making me think of Carvana.
Yeah.
And I wonder what the numbers are actually are. If you had to look at the different car manufacturers that are selling through that channel, what's that sales channel look like compared to the ones who still go out, test drive, get
That's
in the
interesting.
vehicle? Because I would imagine there's a parallel, and where our industry might be worse than as far as the numbers, like performance wise, like
Yeah.
because this is granted a car's pretty personal, though, don't get me wrong, but this is where people lay their heads at night.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more to it.
That's why I think the human element is never going to go completely away
Mm-mm.
because it's too much of a personal thing.
Yep. And at some point, they're going to need some sort of interaction, which comes back to
Hmm.
retention,
Yeah.
right, in the unit. If there is an issue, it's always about it's not whether or not you're going to have an issue, it's how you
It's when.
respond
Yeah,
when it
exactly.
happens, right? Um, so in kind of keeping our thread going, we're talking about influencers and online, and it makes me think kind of about like social media
Yeah.
because at the very end of us having our assets, our biggest challenge, the bane of our existence, which I believe has turned around. So I'm not. This is not a slam on apartmentratings.com. But when they first came out, it seemed like it was only one direction, and it seemed like that was where everybody went to vet. And so we had to deal with it, and that's the way we looked at it. It's like it's something we have to deal with, and hopefully we have an opportunity to turn it around. But that was really our first exposure to
Hmm.
being exposed on social media,
Yeah.
right? So I just wonder, what is that social environment like now?
Well, I think the social piece it's kind of cool because it is a way for the brand to really craft their message and kind of
Mhm.
drive what that message is. But just like you said, it opens them up to a lot of different things. Now,
Mm.
we're a few years into this, so most management companies, they have
And I'm a few years out of it.
No, no, not at all. I'm just saying, at the beginning, I think it was exactly that, like figuring how to navigate the
Mhm.
floodgates, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think
It
that
was intimidating.
very intimidating. And I think now most management companies that we're holding out have some
Mhm.
sort of a social media presence. I think the way different ones are approaching it, I did actually a social media webinar yesterday. We had about 300 attendees and we ran some polls. And just in that group, it was like, how many of you feel that you have a system in place for social media? And there was all these options. And out of that group of 350% said they still feel completely overwhelmed by being in charge of social media marketing for their communities,
Oh, wow.
that they didn't have a cadence for how they post. So when we talk about missed opportunities, I think there's
Hmm.
tremendous opportunity on social media, but it's like sending our troops out there without a plan. And a lot of them, it's just post daily. I've one community reached out to me last week, said, my owner wants me to post 3 days a week. I don't know how I'm going to have time to do that. And I think that we're missing the point. It has to have some sort of consistency. It has to have
Mhm.
brand integrity, but it also has to fall into your stack, right? Not everything is of the same priority. So I think you have to see what is social driving for you and then fill the resources, backfill the resources depending on how many, how much it's creating value for you. Not
Yeah.
everyone is going to be the same.
Right. When you're on that webinar, is this is the social posting, is it falling to the property staff? Is it shared, or is it typically one person? What do you see?
Yeah, so in that poll, that was actually one of the questions we asked, and about 50% said it's on them
Oh, wow.
completely. About 20%, if I remember correctly, said that it was a mix of a third party and them. So the third party would provide so much content, but then they were still required to do some. And then some just said it was a shared between all of the, like
Hmm.
everybody on site. So we're seeing it all over the place, but heavy, heavy on the on site teams.
Right. And that's a lot different than the way most businesses outside of multifamily would approach their social presence.
Yeah. And so I get it, right? Because I love the combo of outsourcing part of it and doing part of it. There's an authenticity that comes when your team is actually posting, when you
Hmm.
meet the people behind the brand. But like we said, there's certain things that only a manager can do, only an assistant can do, and only a leasing can do. And managing, I mean, social could take up their whole day if they were
Hmm.
interacting and whenever somebody posted. So, what I talked about yesterday is how do you make social media scalable? You have to create a system. What are your days of posting? What are the categories that you're going to post with what kind of frequency? And that can be different for different communities. Student housing, that might be one of their
Yep.
number one drivers. And so having someone answering DMs, engaging all day long, that might be valuable. It
Hmm.
might not be the same thing for a senior community. And so you have to know that and then
Yeah.
put the resources in place to fill that.
Oh, that makes sense. Knowing the nuances. All right.
Completely.
All right. Well, before we move on to our next topic, oh my gosh, it's happening again. Where is the time
I
going?
know.
Um, how can, because I want to make sure this is, well, they're all important questions, but how can communities that are tight on their staff and budgets maximize the resources to still effectively market their communities?
So this is a question that gets me excited because there's so many tools out there now that they can use. But I would first say is look at what skill sets you have within your community.
Hmm.
Sometimes you're going to find that one person on your team is just really focused on the retention piece. They're just good with the residents, right? Then there's others that are going to be really good at social media and others, that are going to have different nuances. It's almost like let's look at the talent pool that we have and how can we then creatively give some sort of ownership to different ones.
Hmm.
What is so awesome to me about social media and some of the things that we're even seeing online is it can kind of level the playing field. It's a well thought out plan and some creativity. If you have somebody on your team that is very charismatic, they know how to work social, you're not having to teach them those things,
Hmm.
and they're creating content can be like so much more valuable than them doing certain other things. So I think it's like looking at what you have internally and then deploying them to do that. And same thing with like outreach marketing. It becomes overwhelming when you only do it in emergency mode. If it's part of their cadence and they're doing it regularly, when they're out to lunch with a team, they're kind of interacting. If they're
Hmm.
doing regular events, regularly, building that momentum. I think the emergency mode is when teams feel extra stretched. But I feel like if you look at it with a kind of a schedule, I always talk about focus a little bit on marketing, a little bit of retention, have regular events, even if you don't have a big budget. Some of the things that I'm seeing that our members are doing is like virtual events. So they might post something super simple, like a guess how many candies in this jar on social media. And they might get a ton more engagement on their Instagram with that than at a resident event because their residents maybe are still nervous to come in person
Hmm.
or they just aren't that's not their vibe. But they'll engage like crazy and have these fun conversations. And it's something that costs them like no money. And then they win like a
So
gift
where do they
card.
do something like that? Is that something they would do on Twitter, Instagram, social
Instagram or
media?
Facebook is where
Okay.
they would do something. And typically that is where I'm seeing the communities. Like they're
Okay.
getting the most value. Facebook, if that's their demographic, Instagram, if that's a lot of communities are doing both. LinkedIn is a little bit more personal,
Hmm.
but and Twitter, I don't see a ton of value for the communities there.
Okay.
It moves so quickly. I feel visually that
Mhm.
Instagram and Facebook, and they have so many creator tools in there that it allows for that engagement with the resident and the prospect too.
Okay. So for somebody that is in uh, the position we just talked about, where they're really tight on budget, really quick, is there two tools that you would say that somebody who is not able, like in a position to maybe budget for your company or your services, what are like their two must-have tools outside of social media, like to build content or
Oh,
whatever?
Canva, number one. I mean, it's free.
Okay, I've used that. Woohoo!
Yeah, you know about Canva.
I didn't know if that
Um,
was still the thing or not.
No, and what's cool about that is, that it has a lot of the capabilities that are pretty user friendly. So
Okay.
our platform integrates with it, but if you can't use our platform, use Canva. So to
Okay.
me, that's a huge one.
I always recommend Grammarly.
Oh, yeah, Grammarly's
Grammarly.com.
great too. Yeah.
It's amazing how many people still underestimate how their teams are communicating and the words they choose to use or the lack of punctuation. And I'm the biggest offender, so I'm a huge proponent for
No, I love
Grammarly.com.
Grammarly. I also love, if we're talking about forget a tool, just building out a system. One
Mhm.
of the biggest mistakes that I see is just making themselves templates for everything. So
Mm.
templates for email follow-up, templates for social media captions. It's a little bit of work on the front end, but once you have it, if it's anything you're repeating more than a couple of times a week, make a template.
Yep.
Still personalize it, but then go for there. So I like the systems. I mean, I think there's a lot of tools. The reason I bring up Canva is because it's free and it's easy to use. But yeah, and I think what's nice about even something like Grammarly is, let's say that you're doing a follow-up email, you use Grammarly to do it, but get the best writer on your team to write a few,
Yeah.
drafts of those follow-up emails, and then everyone adds their own personal flair. But that way, it's
Yep.
easy, and you're basically teaching your team to maximize their capacity.
Yep. And I love how you said about thinking about it being thoughtful and intentional. And there are times I know how busy we are out on site. That's probably never going to change. But there are days that are not as busy as
Yeah.
others. And so you know your property cycles. And so if you can designate that time for this is when we're going to build content, then you make it a regular thing
Ab-
and you bring people together to do it.
Yeah, and you can have content like batching sessions. I talked about that a lot too, is, having video and photos of every single floor plan, of every single amenity, of restaurants in the neighborhood, and then organizing it in a Google Drive where everyone can access it. I will tell you, the biggest time wasted in a branding and marketing company is that people don't even know where their logo is. They don't know they don't have their photos. I mean, it's like we talk about basics, but if you're setting up a community for the first time, gather all that stuff and then set on the calendar regular times to batch content, because sometimes the mood hits, but sometimes it doesn't. So this way you
Mhm.
don't have to wait for the mood to hit. You've got content ready to go.
Yep. No, that's great advice. All right. Well, we're not done yet. So we have a little bit of time
Okay.
left. So I just want you to know that.
Okay, I'll try to be
She's like,
fast.
she's like, wait, there's more. I know there's more.
Wait, check out this jacket. Did you see this interior? There's more.
There's more. Let's dive into about, having a dedicated marketing professional. Because I think, I've often said I probably took it for granted back in property management. I mean, I'm unfortunately from the days of, we claimed our Google place.
Yeah.
Woo, score. Things have moved way past that. And until trying to market and launch, our PropTech company on a national scale and having to try and absorb everything that goes into marketing. I think that experience was great because hopefully it makes me a great partner for our marketing team now because I advocate like crazy for them
Yeah.
because I understand all the work that goes into it. Doesn't happen overnight. But I think about if I had a property management company today, how I would approach things very differently.
Mhm.
So I would like to hear your thoughts on how should companies be thinking about approaching marketing and having a marketing professional versus a leasing agent who happened to be good on social.
So I think in an ideal world, we would have a marketing dedicated person for the community. But I think let's take baby steps. We're talking about centralization a lot in leasing. I think marketing, there can be centralization aspect where
Mhm.
you do have a marketing person that can understand 5 to 10 communities and that they can effectively help guide the teams to do that. I see that really to be like a sweet spot. Because I've
Mhm.
worked with a lot of different management companies, the kind where the manager is doing everything, including the leasing and the marketing. I've worked with ones where they've got huge marketing departments. And it's funny, sometimes a lot gets lost in translation with those, like too many cooks in the kitchen, basically, like too many decision makers. There's a sweet spot when there's one person taking kind of the lead in the marketing, but empowering the teams. There's a lot the teams, it just comes out better when the teams
more
are
organic,
providing,
authentic.
yes, the authentic. It's hard to replicate what
Mhm.
is actually happening on site, but having the leadership of a marketing director. So if let's say you and I were starting a management company, let's pretend, okay? I would say for every, 7 to 10, have one person that can kind of be the point person that understands the
Mhm.
markets and can drive it. But I would not say make them the graphic designer, the social media poster. Still give them the tools. One person cannot effectively market 10 communities, right?
Hmm.
So it's like, what are the best tools? What is the best bang for their buck? But let them kind of drive that direction. That would be my ideal.
Yep. I love that you just pointed out about what you expect of that
Yeah.
person, because I think that's probably been the one thing that I've been surprised at, and I still watch happen to this day at different companies, is there's a lack of understanding about what goes into developing content. And I think because of that, we take sometimes our marketing teams or the individual contributors who do the designs or that put out the social posts. There's work that goes into
Every
that
step.
final draft. And I think if I hadn't been solely responsible for it and suffering on my execution, I'm sure. I think somebody called it schizophrenic marketing at one point in time at Resman. I'm just going to own it. It was what it was. But it takes so much time.
It does.
The number of versions that end up in the trash or in the recycle bin. How many times you go through a different font size. Like, unless you've ever done it, you don't understand. And so, my nugget for anyone that's listening today is you take a moment to dive in, spend some time with your marketing team and the people who are doing the work, because I think you would be very surprised about what that process looks like and how much time it takes.
Yeah. And, a lot of them are not just responsible for those things. They're also then meeting with all of their advertisers. They're reviewing data. They're looking at leasing trends. They're looking at marketing trends, learning about AI. I mean, literally, it's a lot for any one person. So I think you put a pin on that it's being realistic about what one person can do well.
Yep. Do you have a resource that you like to recommend for people that are coming up? So somebody who's come up that was a great social poster and had a lot of engagement for the site level, that's now in a leasing director or a leasing and marketing role, that kind of is moving up through the ranks, but has never actually gone to school, doesn't have a background in marketing. Like, what advice would you give them? Is there any resources that you would say are available to them?
Well, I mean, I feel very guilty plugging my podcast, but that's who I made it for. It's Marketing Home, Marketing You, and it's literally a piece by piece on how to market. But I will also say that learning from outside of the industry, is going to be huge. So following, somebody like Amy Porterfield who does online marketing, she's got an incredible podcast and she walks you through every little piece of building out, funnels, email campaigns, social media, just really detailed. So I think if you're trying to bootstrap it, YouTube, podcasts, I went through a course myself. Marie Forleo does a course called B School, and it's basically a marketing kind of a boot camp. Now, it's generic in the sense of not for the industry, but I think those are good places to start.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, I think at one point I stumbled across HubSpot.
Yeah, Yeah, there's places like
they
HubSpot.
have so much free content and sessions, like actual classes. So yeah, if you're listening to this, not only would I encourage you to make the space for your marketing team members to invest in themselves, highly encourage it, but then reward it.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things, and I don't know if it's still the same, but when we're out at trade shows and conferences, a lot of people come through our booth. A lot of your people come through our booth. Let me rephrase that. And, when you have people that are going outside their comfort zones and are doing a lot of this work for you on top of their leasing jobs, and yes, they're paid a salary. I'm a big believer that salary, that hourly wage is for something. When you have people that are stretching themselves and they're doing things and your assets are benefiting from that work, you need to reward it.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I think we can lose sight of it because we've all got so much going on, but you need to know what your teams are doing out on site.
Rewarding that initiative, because that's what you want to see. And I'm so glad you kind of took a little time, because something else I wanted to share, there's also a program called Masterclass.
Oh, I can't believe I didn't think of that.
And I love it. They've got a beautiful course on design, copywriting, storytelling. I think for under $200 for the year. The courses are top. I'm sure top notch.
Yes. Oh, you don't know. I laugh so loud. Y'all forgive me for laughing out loud like that. You have no idea how many times a week I bring up Masterclass.
Do you really? Okay, good.
Oh, yes.
It's funny. It's like when the mic turns on, you're like, what tools do you use? I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
But yes.
Yeah, my favorite one right now, yes, everyone at Inhabit and Resman specifically are going to be like, oh no, she did not.
What are you plugging?
And shout out to NMHC because he was their guest, but Coach K, his leadership series.
I haven't watched that one.
Oh.
Is it amazing?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm like the only person apparently in the whole multifamily industry who didn't know who he was. I do know. I understand. He's a famous basketball coach, but his leadership sessions are the bomb.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
that's
so that gives me something to look forward
yes,
to. I got to check it out.
different topic, but yes,
But
I'm a
that's a
huge fan
great
of
investment.
masterclass.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, invest. Invest in yourself so other people will want to continue to invest in you.
Nugget number
I know.
8,246
It's
for
something.
today.
All right. Well, I think we've reached the end of our time, which is terrible.
I
And
know.
we barely scratched the surface, but wait, there's more. You're going to be at Resmania.
I'm so
So,
excited. So, can I talk a little bit about what we're going to do?
yes.
Okay. So, we're kind of putting marketing trends in the hot seat, and it's which ones to adopt and which ones to chop. So, for a lot of
Love
our
that
marketing,
title.
yes, for a lot of our marketing directors, they have so many things to choose from. We talked about a few of them, but this is going to go even
Mhm.
way more in depth. And we're basically going to pre-put these things through the trial and see which ones are actually working right now, not 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but right now and worth adopting. So I think it's going to be so much fun.
It is. And I know I've already gotten wind of who your two guests are. So it's not a panel, but it is a different experience.
Yes, it's going to be
So
awesome.
I can't wait. I'm like, oh, I hope I don't have a session at the same
You
time.
better not.
I need to rework my schedule.
We need you there.
All right. All right. Well, Barbara, you've been fantastic. I hope you enjoyed coming today.
Oh my God, I
and-
loved it, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's and I hope audience, I hope you guys enjoyed it too. We really had some fun. It was very
did.
sincere. I'm in awe of what you do. You have me all excited. I wish I had properties again. And who says that?
I know.
In their right mind.
Who, after having done it, says
Yeah,
that?
exactly. But that just says something. It's
Oh.
about how, what we do is special.
Yeah, it is.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and that you'll join us again next time. Be sure to subscribe to PropTalk on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And to learn more about Resman's property management platform and to get more valuable insights into the multifamily ecosystem, please visit myresman.com. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you,
ya.
Elizabeth. Bye.